Of Giving What We Can speaking to us. But first he will be introduced by Julian Savulescu of the Hero Centre for Practical Ethics.
Thanks very much. How long do you want me to introduce for?
5 minutes.
Okay, I'll do short of that. So I came here in 2002, and it's Oxford is a very difficult place. When I first came here, there was just me and then Nick Bostrom I met. And at the beginning, it was really banging our heads against a brick wall. I remember that we had... How many people here are from the philosophy faculty? Okay, all right. Well, this is confidential. Don't mention these stories. And so, I came here, and then we were overseen by the philosophy faculty. And I remember once I eventually got our donors to give quite a significant amount of money, so they were being admitted to the Chancellor's Court of Benefactors. That the head of the philosophy faculty at that time was very keen to make sure we weren't running them up. So he created a whole bunch of rules to make sure that we weren't siphoning off money from the university. And one of these rules was that we had to have every single gift approved by him personally. And our donor was about to give £3 million to the university, and we'd already had approval for a desk set. And this was going to be presented to him, and so I said, well, we should get some pencils for this test set. And my secretary said, well, you've got to get the chairman's approval for the pencils. I said, but it's just a dozen pencils. He said, no, you've got to get approval. I said, I'll pay for it, it's all right. So eventually we paid for them, we got the desk, and he went ballistic about the pencils, because this was going to be a great pencil scam. And one of the other things that was hugely depressing when I came back to Oxford, because I was here as a postdoc, was everyone was talking about exactly the same thing as they were in 1995. What is the concept of a reason? Maybe some of you are working on the concept of a reason. But it's a hugely important topic, but it doesn't require 30 people to work on it each year. And I was very, very kind of depressed about this atmosphere. And I've been depressed about many things about Oxford. But one of the great things has been Toby. I think he has been really one of the outstanding successes of Oxford, and this event tonight I think is one of the most exciting events that's happening in Oxford, because this isn't more of the concept of a reason. And what Toby has tried to do is actually apply great analytic philosophy to real practical problems, and this will be the future. The people who are kind of ruminating about meta-ethics and the concept of a reason and logic and so on will struggle in the future. Because they're hugely intelligent, but they're largely irrelevant. And what Toby is not is irrelevant. And there are many things I don't agree with what Toby says, but one of the things that he does is he challenges you to think about your own position. And that, I think, is the success of real philosophy and real ethics. If you think about the world, science is about describing the laws of nature, and we don't do that. The only area of philosophy that is distinctively important is not philosophy of mathematics, philosophy of mind, philosophy of biology. Biologists, mathematicians and physicists know much more about those areas than philosophers do. They're irrelevant, really, they're just commentators. But the one area that we're not commentators on is moral philosophy. It's about deciding what we should do. Because no scientist, no physicist, no biologist, nobody can tell us what we should do. That's the area that we should be devoting our attention to in philosophy, and that's the area that Toby's devoting his attention to. And so, as I said, I don't agree with Toby in lots of his areas, but he's caused me to rethink, my own positions, and I said in one of my blogs that I'm supporting a child in Italy. It cost me £10,000 a year, and I can survive that. So I said, when I finish supporting that child, I can devote that amount of money to doing other things. And that was because Toby made me think about what my life was and what I should be doing. So I think that's a huge success. So I think that what you're doing tonight is the most important thing that's occurring in not only Oxford philosophy but Oxford academia. So it's a great privilege to introduce you.
Thanks, Julian. You managed to be controversial even in your introductions. So I'll probably not be able to live up to that introduction, but I'll see what I can do. It is an interesting thing that Julian is the chair of practical ethics at Oxford, and Practical ethics could be a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could discuss as the ethics of. And I've done a lot of looking at the ethics of global poverty and thinking about donations and what our personal obligations are. And tonight I want to talk a bit about the ethics of career choice. So the question we have here is in which career can you make the most difference? And you probably are not really going to be leading to an answer here of a particular career. It will depend upon the person. But I want to try to look at it and really think about career choice from a kind of philosophical point of view. So let's start off thinking about your life. So you each have about 60 years of life ahead of you. Something like that. Okay, that's quite a lot, and it's a long time in which you can do great things for yourself and for others. For the purpose of this talk, let's set aside all of the great things that you can do for yourself in your life, all of the wonderful leisure time you can have, perhaps your personal relationships and what you get from them and things like that. Although there's plenty that you will have there. And let's think about what you can do for others in that period of time. So when I think about this question for myself, I tend to divide it up into these 4 different areas of what you can achieve in your life. So that one of them was the voluntary work. There's many things that you can do, taking some time out and putting it into different types of organisations and societies that can help people in various ways. I don't need to explain that. There's your career, what you can do there. There's personal relationships, so helping your friends and your family through difficulties in their lives, and just making the good times even better. And there's also, on top of all of that, there's ways in which you can donate your money in order to help people who are in need. Now, normally when I talk about these things, I focus on donations, and I've talked a lot about that in the past, but what I'm doing tonight is talking about this different quadrant here. Maybe eventually I'll get through all of them. So, when it comes to your career, you'll spend something like 80,000 hours on your career. It depends on exactly whether you meet the European Working Time Directive or not, and so forth, and when you retire, when you start work. I only started a paid job when I was 30, so I missed out on a few of these hours. But that's around about what you're looking at. And that's a lot of time, and a substantial proportion of your life is going to be spent in your career. And so you really want to make sure that it counts. And it's really well worth thinking about this beforehand and taking it seriously, rather than just going with the flow when it comes to your career. With modern careers, there's often a lot of changing career choice halfway through compared to what there was 50 years ago. But it's still well worth having some idea as to what you're really trying to achieve with your career at the start of it. And if you think about this, if you could improve the value of that 80,000 hours by 1%, so you could get done 1% more of what you find of value in that time, then that would be worth around about 800 hours of thought to work out beforehand how to do that. Okay? That's a lot of time. Right? And 1% doesn't sound that hard to achieve, to really make that much better. So I do think this is the type of thing where it's very good value thinking about it. I also think that we can often improve the value by much more than that. In my case, I won't really go into this much, but I did some elaborate calculations as to how much I thought I could achieve over my career, and that was particularly looking at what I could achieve by donating my income over my career. And I worked out how much I could achieve. And then I ended up achieving 20 times as much of that in the first 3 years of my career by starting up this organisation, giving what we can, and getting a whole lot of other people to donate their money, and getting influence over organisations and government groups and so on, thinking about development aid. So it turns out that you can actually get quite significant improvements on what you think you can do. So what we want to do now is spend an hour including questions, thinking about the big picture regarding how much impact you can have in your career. So let's spend one of these 800 hours or so, and maybe even in this 1 hour, you can increase your expected value of your career by more than 1%, which would suggest it's probably worth having some more hours to think about. So I want you to think big about careers. Okay? And maybe thinking bigger than some previous talks that 80,000 hours has run on this topic. So here's a question of how much can you achieve, try to quantify that, at least roughly. And I want, as a case study, so the example to fix on to start with, to be Oskar Schindler. So Oskar Schindler saved around about 1,200 Jews from the Holocaust. He saved their lives by allowing them to work in this factory that he set up for this purpose. And he's often regarded as a hero who had an amazing opportunity, or a quite unique and unusual opportunity, in exceptionally difficult times. And he took that opportunity and risked himself. And he managed to get all of this to work. He didn't kind of get caught and in trouble with the Nazi regime. And he managed to save the lives of about 1,200 people. Okay. Now, my claim tonight is that everyone here in this room can do as much good as Oskar Schindler in their career. So I want to use this as a baseline for a high-impact career. You might think that it's exceptional. Certainly the standard view in society is that it is very exceptional. It certainly is very good compared to a typical career. But I think that if you're really actually trying to have a career with a lot of value, you can do as good as this, or significantly better, actually. So I want to take you through a few people with really exceptional careers to get something of an idea as to the envelope of possibilities that we're looking at. So Alan Turing first. So he was an English mathematician. Probably many of you know about Turing. He developed the theoretical underpinnings for computers before he started his PhD, which I think is pretty good. So he wrote a seminal paper on this in 1936. And a number of people had been coming up with similar mathematical ideas at the same time, but his idea was much more practical, the way that he put it, and it did have significant impact in actually creating a computer. He's often considered to be the father of the computer, or one of the fathers of the computer. And he didn't just come up with theoretical underpinnings, he also did significant subsequent work on putting it into practice. And he then played a major role in code breaking for the Allies during World War II. And this role that he played at Bletchley Park is often credited with ending the war a year earlier than otherwise would have ended. So making the massive bloodshed and killing of World War II 1 year shorter than it would otherwise have been, which is pretty impressive. World War II killed around about 60 million people, so by making it a year shorter, he would have saved millions of lives in that case. And that's thousands of times more lives than Oskar Schindler, as well as inventing the computer. So that's kind of like this extra thing that he did on top of this. So I think that that's pretty impressive. Here's another computer-oriented person who I would say is an American businessman. He knew how to program, but he didn't make his money by programming. He made his money by being a fairly ruthless businessman in the software industry. He earned something like $100 billion in the software industry. It's a bit hard to say because it was all in Microsoft stock, which went up and down at different times of work, different amounts. And he's donated $28 billion of this so far to various causes. Some of these have been very effective in fighting diseases in developing countries. He's paid a lot of attention to the effectiveness of his money and is using at least some of it very well. Some of his money is going on other things, such as trying to improve education in the United States, and I think that money spent on that's probably doing less good than money spent on developing world causes. But certainly he's spent a lot of those, and he's spent it very well. It's kind of a paragon of donor efficiency. He aims to donate 95% of this wealth, so $95 billion or so over his life. And then presumably leave $5 billion to his children. So it's still quite good for them. And he also managed to convince Warren Buffett and 67 other billionaires to pledge to donate more than 50% of their wealth. He didn't say exactly where, and maybe some of them would have given quite a bit of that money anyway. But it does seem that he's had significant impact in actually changing this culture of giving within billionaires in America in particular. So I think that looks pretty impressive. It's hard to say exactly how much he's achieved there so far and how much he will achieve. At the very least, it's saving millions of lives, or thousands of times more, again, than our baseline example. Here is someone you probably haven't heard of. I don't even know how to pronounce his name. Victor Shidano. Thank you. Who was a Russian virologist who became Deputy Minister for Health in the USSR. And he put forward a proposal to the World Health Assembly to commit them to eradicating smallpox. So that, as you probably know, happened. They agreed to this proposal. They were bound to do it. They then set up a task force, and within a decade of setting that up, they eradicated smallpox from the world. Now, smallpox had been an exceptionally deadly disease. Some countries being vaccinated, so at this point, the UK wasn't getting any smallpox deaths, but there were many other smallpox deaths in the rest of the world. And even with some countries being vaccinated, smallpox killed more people in the 20th century than war, genocide, and murder all put together. So it was killing a lot of people. After the proposal put forward by Victor Shidano, we got rid of smallpox and stopped something that was killing more people than war. That's not to say necessarily that it was a bigger thing than war, because war has other effects as well, including obviously a lot of disabling injury and things that it causes, and economic destruction of various sorts. But then smallpox causes that as well. I'm not sure overall which was the bigger thing. Although with this, the death toll from smallpox, that was all up until 1980, because by then it had been eradicated. So generally we think that the 20th century was a pretty big century for fatalities from war, and smallpox was bigger there. So that was a pretty big thing. And interestingly, Victor didn't invent the technology to eradicate smallpox. There are a large list of names of people who are involved in this project, but he, in some sense, was the kind of prime mover in making it happen, as he got them to commit to making it happen. And arguably, that's the most important part of this team, although it's not quite clear how to divide this up between all the major players. So it was eradicated in 1979, and it's estimated that 120 million lives have been saved since then, which is something like 100,000 times as much as the baseline career that we were looking at. Two more here. So Norman Borlaug was an American agronomist, so he looked at how you could improve crop yields. And he was deeply concerned about the possibility of starvation due to growing population in the second half of the 20th century. And so he did a lot of work on this. I'm not actually sure if that's why he went into his career in the first place, but it certainly explained a lot of what he was trying to do, which is to increase crop yields. And it's quite amazing, actually, the way that he achieved this, which is pretty simple. His main insight was that you could try to get as many grains as possible on each stalk of wheat in order to increase the yields per hectare. And if you tried to get too many grains, though, onto a stalk of wheat, they'd fall over, and they couldn't hold themselves up anymore, and would rot, and couldn't keep the water off them. So that was no good. So he found that actually experimenting and starting with a strain of dwarf wheat, which has a thicker, shorter stem, it was less likely to fall over if you put more grains of wheat on it. And so you could get more grains of wheat per hectare, and you could feed the population of India, which was rapidly growing at that time. So that was known as the Green Revolution, and it's a pretty simple idea, which was quite at the core of it. But he managed to get all of this stuff done, which is pretty impressive. It's estimated that this saved around about 245 million lives so far, which is about 200,000 times the baseline career that we're talking about. Finally, as an example, Peter Singer, an Australian philosopher. He's been very influential in two major movements, which is fighting factory farming and also fighting global poverty, and organising individual grassroots type resistance to factory farming, taking animal welfare very seriously, and it's kind of hard to overestimate how important he's been in that, and also in terms of fighting global poverty. And he really got these things noticed in the ethics community and started to get people interested in practical ethics and engaging with the world, which I hope will have an even bigger effect in the future when people really start taking these issues seriously, such as the issues we're talking about tonight, and really start moving forward with this, taking a kind of serious analytical approach to actually making the world better. So, sadly, I don't have any quantitative estimates as to how much is achieved, but I think it's probably a lot. I'm not sure it's as much as some of these other people. So, now what I want to do is think about impact, and so it's a little bit more philosophical now, to try to distinguish a couple of things. So firstly, I want to think about an intuitive view of impact. So the intuitive view, I'm saying, is the view that your impact is the benefit that you directly produce. And I'll give an example to show that. But the other view is what we call the counterfactual view. And that's the view that your impact is the difference between what happens with your action and what would have happened otherwise. So here's an example. So imagine a surgeon. Over the course of her career, a surgeon performs 1,000 life or death operations. So just to simplify it, it's a case where if someone comes in for this surgery, they're going to die if they don't have it. And if they have it, it's either successful or not successful. You could complicate the example, but there's no need. And let's suppose that this surgeon is successful in 80% of these operations. So the question then is what's her impact? So on the intuitive view, the benefit is saving 800 lives. So 80% of the 1,000 life-saving operations. That sounds right, at least at first glance. The counterfactual view is a little bit more complicated, but I think it gets a better account of this. So it says that in order to have the impact, it depends upon what would have happened had the surgeon gone into a different career. So for example, if another surgeon would have been employed, which is a typical case, let's say the other surgeon would have been employed and would have only been successful in 70% of the operations. In this case, on the counterfactual view, they say that this surgeon, over her career, really saved 100 lives. That was the impact there. Because 800 people walked out of the hospital alive, and if she hadn't taken up that career, 700 people would have walked out of the hospital alive instead. And here's another one to make it maybe a little bit more clear. So if the surgeon's replacement would have been successful in 90% of the operations, then it seems like the surgeon, on this account, says the surgeon cost 100 lives and didn't actually save any lives at all. That led to more people dying. And I think that sounds right. I mean, if you suppose you were the surgeon, and let's suppose you could go to some other career that no one else was going to do otherwise and save 5 lives. Or you could become a surgeon and lead to 100 more people dying than would otherwise have died from operations. But, intuitively you save 800 lives while doing that. You save 800 and you let 100 die who would have died otherwise, and 100 die who wouldn't have died otherwise. On the intuitive view, it kind of suggests that you should do that, but actually kind of knocking out more successful people from the area doesn't actually seem like such a smart move. It looks like it's getting the answer wrong there. And we should really think about it in terms of this counterfactual view. So let's just continue a little bit more on that. The intuitive view is about making sure that you are the closest person in the causal chain of good outcomes. So it's like getting in as close as you can. If there's a long chain of people, each of whom influences the next person in some manner, you want to be the person just before the action. Now, the counterfactual view is instead about making sure that good outcomes happen, leading to good outcomes that wouldn't have occurred otherwise. That's the insight behind it. And the intuitive view leads to certain self-defeating actions. So, for example, you can imagine a case where your father gets very sick, and you call. If someone calls a paramedic, and the ambulance arrives and they get out to try to attend to him. On the intuitive view, it suggests that since it's worth something if you do it personally, it suggests you should get in the way of the paramedics and try to help your father yourself, and maybe you will only be much less successful at helping him. But you get the glory from that. But it seems again more intuitively, more on reflection of this situation. That actually you should stay the hell out of that situation. In fact, you're the type of person who should be calling the paramedics and making this good stuff happen. It doesn't matter that you're not the person who's directly doing it. You're making it the case that your father will be saved. And that's what's important, not saving it yourself in a kind of heroic action. The counterfactual view takes into account other people's actions, and I think it provides the right advice. Now, this is important when you think about replaceability. So when you're thinking about which career to enter, using the counterfactual view makes a really big difference. The main issue here is what I call replaceability. So careers where someone else would be roughly doing what you do are less valuable when they first appear. So the surgeon was an example of that, where if they hadn't taken up that career, then typically someone else would have been employed and would have done something roughly similar. They would have saved a similar amount of lives. So the surgeon in that sense is somewhat replaceable. Now, if the surgeon is just a really natural, brilliant person of surgery, and the replacement was going to save 70% of the lives instead of 80% of the lives, well, then they are making a pretty big difference. They're saving 100 lives. That's pretty big in the normal scheme of things. Maybe it's not very big compared to what we're talking about tonight. But in typical cases, the difference would be smaller than that. It would be more that the surgeon would save 80% of the lives, and the next surgeon would save 78 or 81 or 72, or there'd be somewhere around there. We could generally imagine that you'd be a little bit better than your replacement, because otherwise they would have employed your replacement instead of you if you both went to the same job interview. However, there's a little bit of noise in the system as well. It's often not quite clear who's better. And sometimes we, at job interviews, tend to employ the more attractive person or something like that. So it's a particular worry for you if you're quite attractive, because then you're probably more likely to get jobs over people who are perhaps a little bit more skilled or something. So there'd be a particular worry for replaceability in those cases. But that's more of a joke. But there's not always something there. So other careers or other approaches that have less of this replaceability end up being a bit more valuable in careers. So let's just go through those very big impact careers and think about them in terms of replaceability. So for Oskar Schindler, no one else was going to save these people. I think that's fairly clear. Maybe it's not exactly clear that they all would have died. They presumably would have, at least most of them, been taken off to concentration camps and had a terrible experience, and then presumably a lot of them would have died. It's not quite clear though. But if he hadn't done this job, it's not that someone else would have gone in and saved these 1,200 people. That wasn't happening very often. It was quite exceptional. So it did look like there was no replaceability problem there. For Norman Borlaug, we probably would have mostly come up with high human crops. I should say that for all of these hypothetical counterfactuals, these are just my guesses on these things. I originally typed it out with the words, my best guess is, and then I decided to leave that for brevity. But I think that we would have mostly come up with these high human crops, but we would have done so later. And there probably would have been famines, or at least there's a pretty reasonable chance that there would have been serious famines due to not having this done. He did get there really in the nick of time. And so it's not the case, though, that if you invent something, that it means that, that it wouldn't have been invented without you, typically. Normally, someone else would eventually invent the same thing. The question is how long that would take. And maybe it would take, say, an extra 10 years and then it would be back to the same spot. Or maybe it means that technological development of that thing would lag 10 years behind forever. That's perhaps likely to be the case with a computer. That if a computer had been invented 10 years earlier, we might be 10 years ahead in terms of software and everything now. Or if it was 10 years later, 10 years ahead. So Alan Turing, and as I say, I think we would have had computers by now. There was a bit of this kind of idea in the air with the theoretical underpinnings. There were two other different versions of computation which came out within a year of Alan Turing's idea independently. They weren't as practical as his, but I think the idea would have come up. But it wouldn't have come up in time for the Great World War II. So presumably, on this kind of standard account, there would have been an extra year of misery in World War II, with all the death toll that would entail. Obviously, it would have also increased the chance that the Allies lost World War II. So the kind of guesses are that that wouldn't have happened, but it's not clear. So, and our computers would have been behind with our net, but I don't really know how to account for With Bill Gates, it was quite interesting because the money that he made probably would have been made by someone anyway. However, almost certainly would have donated less of it. Bill Gates is quite exceptional in how much he's donated. And they would have donated it almost certainly less effective. He's really standout case for effective donation. So that means that what's really happened there in his career was that he really has meant that maybe $80 billion more has gone to charity than would have gone otherwise, which is a really big impact. And that's a nice feature of what he was doing, because in some sense, as a business mogul managing a large software company, he was replaceable. But as a donor, he wasn't replaceable, or wouldn't have been replaced. And in the case of Shabanov, we may not have eradicated smallpox yet, is my guess on that. It's not really clear. Smallpox was a really bad disease, and it was quite interesting. It was the easiest and most high-value disease to eradicate, partly because it was so bad, partly because the symptoms were very distinctive, and the way that it was transmitted and incubation periods and so on meant that they could actually contain it with an eradication strategy. With other diseases, it's more difficult. There are no other diseases that were eradicated since then, although there are a couple which got down to less than 1% of their previous instance. So they're only affecting 1,000 people per annum instead of 100,000 or 1 million people per annum. So we have made a lot of progress in some other things. Eradicating smallpox gave people confidence to try to eradicate some other diseases. My guess would be that within the next 20 years, probably about 4 diseases are going to be eradicated. And so we would have probably been behind on that schedule if we hadn't eradicated smallpox at the time we did. It's not even clear that we would have eradicated smallpox by now. At some point, they'll eradicate it. So it's not that he's produced an infinite stream of benefit by eradicating it at one point. It wasn't our only chance to eradicate it, but it's unclear whether it would have happened by now. And so I think that the replaceability issue is not so big there, but I'm not quite sure. And in the case of Peter Singer, these movements, I think, would have been much less influential, especially the anti-factory farming movement, which has really taken a lot of inspiration from his work. I should say that he didn't, I don't know that he was the originator of this idea. When he was at Oxford doing the B-Phil, he met up with various vegetarian friends and talked about these things, and I think they got him into it. So maybe they, in some ways, can get the credit for convincing Peter Singer to write about factory farming, I think, in the New York Times, and to write about global poverty. I don't know where he got that idea particularly from, but he really took these things and ran with them, and was not particularly replaceable. If someone just said, we're going to employ a different philosopher instead of Peter Singer, you would have got a lot less good outcome. So, when it comes to making impact, my summary would be, you need to make things happen rather than to do them. So it's the intuitive or naive view, which is about you need to do the stuff. What you really need to do is to make the stuff happen in the world, if you want to have the impact. Once you get this idea, many possibilities open up, and I want to explore a few of them. So Viktor Shganov didn't personally prevent cases of smallpox or even come up with the vaccine, but he put the world into a state where it was going to be eradicated by getting the World Health Assembly to sign this. Now, let's look at some ideas for careers. So here are a couple of ideas. So career idea 1. So some charitable interventions are much more valuable than others, but this is readily acknowledged for a number of reasons, actually. The best interventions are something like 100 times as valuable as the median interventions. There's a really radical disparity. There are a number of reasons why people don't acknowledge this so much. One is that people are often in particular areas, and then what they do is they try to be as effective as possible within that area. So for example, they want to deliver antiretroviral drugs to fight AIDS. Then they try to cut down on the administration costs. They try to be as lean a machine as they can to get ARVs to the people who need them. And they think that's what efficiency is all about. It's about doing that mission as effectively as possible. But they don't think, should we be doing ARVs or should we be doing condom distribution? They tend not to think about these wider things. Should we be doing AIDS at all, or should we be doing malaria? once they've set up an organisation, they tend to just make it more effective at what it does and not think about switching between areas. And almost no one thinks about that. And that's one of the reasons why this hasn't been discussed very much. But given that fact, and armed with this insight, we get to a situation where one thing you can do is go and work in a grant-making foundation that distributes the grants to different charities and tries to see how much you can get done. And if you could give the money to somewhere that was 100 times as effective, very realistically you could have access to millions of pounds and develop into things which are actually making 100 times as much difference. And if you think about that, moving money to something that makes 100 times as much impact, that means that suppose you're going to be saving a certain number of lives, you then save 100 times that many lives, and so the extra amount of lives you've saved is 99 times what was being saved already. So it's actually a really big impact that you're making there. Career idea, I was going to call it 2, and I decided 1B was better because it's basically just copying the previous one but changing some words. Some research is much more valuable than other research in universities. Maybe not there's some extreme views on this presented before me, which I won't necessarily endorse, but I think most of us are aware that some bits of research do actually have a lot more impact than other bits of research. One example is that there are more papers on dung beetles than there are on the risk of human extinction and what we should do about it, or anything to do with the risk of human extinction, actually. So armed with the insight that what we would do is to want to make sure that things happen rather than do them ourselves, and access to information about some research being more valuable than others, you could go and work in a research grant-making foundation, maybe a government foundation, or the NSF or something like that in America. You could fund things like catastrophic risk prevention or the Green Revolution. That's what Norman Borlaug's project was called subsequently. So you could try to look for these high-value things and fund them. And again, it's quite plausible that you'd have access to many millions of pounds, and you could divert them to things which are 100 times as valuable. So here's another career idea. Some researchers have much more impact than others. Trust me, this is different to the previous one. That was about some research has much more impact. So for example, Turing, Borlaug, Singer, these types of researchers are having, or had, immense impact, really amazing impact. Now, perhaps it's unlikely that you can produce research with staggering impact like that. If not, that's fantastic. I'd like to talk to you afterwards. But surprisingly, you can have almost as much impact as these people, even if you can't produce that research yourself. One thing you can do as a career choice is this. End up in a university, if you're a researcher, find the best researcher in your department. So suppose you're in Oxford, let's say you're in Oxford in physics. Find the best researcher in physics in your department and do their teaching load for them. So just say, okay, I'll take on your tutorials so you don't have to do the teaching load and you can spend that time doing the research. Then you increase the research being done by the best physicists in your department by 20% or something in terms of the amount of time that they can do. And so, in fact, for every hour you take on of the teaching load, you give them an hour of research. And that's actually much better than if you're trying to, have all those hours for yourself in terms of actually helping the world, because you get a better researcher to do it. This works for everyone who's not the best researcher. It's a bit weird that no one ever thinks of doing this. It's a bit of a problem. It says something about how much this idea of career choice, ethical career choice, I think is really in its infancy. That people aren't thinking like this. But once you've changed with this mindset to, instead of having to do it, I want to be the one who, develops the cure for cancer. A better thought is, I want to see to it that the cure for cancer is developed. It doesn't have to be me. I don't have to get my grubby hands on the cure for cancer, get all the glory and so on. You could do this other approach. If you're at Oxford, you could probably get, and you're in science, you could probably get a Nobel Prize-winning scientist to get as many hours as you have in this place. Oh, it's an interesting message there. I don't want to click on it. This is the idea, to get the best researchers in your department and try to actually make them more productive. allow them to spend those hours on research. And once you let go of the idea of it being you who does the research, this possibility opens up. Here's another idea, which is kind of a riff on that one. So there are many other ways you can allow people to have additional high-quality hours. So it might not be the case that, let's say you're focusing on Norman Borlaug, and it was in the 1970s, and he was working on these areas. You might not be an agronomist or something who could try to actually help him out by doing some of his other research activities. But there are plenty of other ways that you could help, even if you didn't have a university education. So you could go and say, what other low-value, non-leisure things is he spending his time on? And you could do those for him. So this is going to be a bit more humorous. You could often be a personal assistant or mow their lawn, arrange their tradesmen for them and so on. Like when they need to get a plumber and have to come home and then go in. And just all of this kind of crap of daily life. If there's someone who's actually having this huge impact with their career, then actually just making sure they don't have to do this kind of low-value stuff is really important. Better yet, pay for someone to do these things for them. So that's perhaps not a career in that case, unless you're earning money in order to pay for people to be personal assistants for these people. Interestingly, my guess is if you found someone who's that productive and you asked them, would you like me to pay for a personal assistant for you, they would say no, because they feel very awkward about it. But you'd have to somehow also convince them that it was a good idea, probably by just actually paying for it before you ask them. That would probably be a smart move in this. But pointing out to them as well just how high value their time is. My experience of meeting people who are in this category, super highly effective researchers and so on, is that they often are fairly unaware of how important they are in their lives. And for example, how important it is that they don't die in a car crash or something like that. And they don't take appropriate kind of safety for themselves, and often out of some feeling of modesty, kind of incorrectly applied feeling of modesty, because if Norman Borlaug had died in a car crash, then it perhaps would have been the highest fatality car crash ever, with 200 million people, say, dying because of the car crash. So actually the safety was really important, and you really, trying to get this across to some people, or trying to help them out with some of the things, trying to make them more effective is the basic idea. You can see that you could expand on this, and you could think of your own ways to try to do it. This is the very first draft of this. Quite plausibly, you could turn, say, 1% to 50% of your time into the time of a super productive person, if you can find them and help them out with this. I should add that it's not as trivial as you might have thought from the previous thing, in that in the case of someone like Norman Borlaug or Alan Turing or Bill Gates, you don't necessarily know that they're going to do these things from the get-go. And if you go and find them now, it might be too late, they're past the years where they're most productive. But it might be the case that you can't always guess in advance, and part of it's a hindsight bias that you can see who's productive. So you'll only be able to look at people based on their kind of expected productiveness for the future. So it will be a little bit harder than this, but the basic idea holds. And you can do this for multiple people, so you could spend a bit of your time, mowing the lawn for one person and then the other person and so forth. I'm sure there's actually something to this that's less humorous and feels like you could really make a go of it. Perhaps one thing you could do is to set up a volunteer group to do this kind of thing. And kind of, it would seem pretty cool actually. You could find other people who thought that this was a way they could really help make a big difference, and just make sure a lot of these kind of trivial tasks are done for various people. Or other ways that you can make them more productive. You could go and show them some task management software which would make their research life more productive, and give them a nice little tutorial on it or something like that. Various ideas that you could do. So in general, you could divide up a lot of these ideas for careers into these categories: researchers, influencers, improvers, and professional philanthropists. And I'll just go through them in turn and give an idea of them. So researchers, quite a few of the people in the original list for researchers, they make things happen by developing the necessary science, mathematics, engineering, or perhaps ideas, so in the case of Peter Singer, that are needed in order for these things to occur. They can also determine which approaches work the best, so that we can spend more of our time and money on those approaches that work the best. So that's an example of, say, research and charity cost effectiveness. They don't just have to invent new things, or come up with new scientific theories which allow inventors to invent new things, but they can also try to look at the things that we've got and try to work out what's the most effective way to use our time. It's another researcher approach. Influencers, they make things happen by influencing people or organisations to do the things that will do the most to improve society, the environment, some other area. For example, advocating that DFID or the public fund the most effective aid programs would be an example. Getting other people to think about adopting high impact careers would be an example. Getting careers in politics or public service would be another example of influence type of careers. Improvers, it's perhaps a little bit less clear what that's about. So they can make things happen by finding the individuals or organisations that are extremely effective and making them even more effective. So my examples of improving existing researchers by doing some of their teaching load or some other aspect in order to get them to be more effective. Professional philanthropists, the example that we had earlier is this huge example of a professional philanthropist, which is Bill Gates, but you can do this on much more kind of everyday scales by taking some kind of a career in finance or law and using it to fund millions of treatments for neglected tropical diseases or something like this. Professional philanthropists make things happen by using a high-earning career to fund the highest impact projects that they can. And if they thought there were a whole lot of other people, say who were influencers, who were having very high impact with the time that they could spend influencing, perhaps they were influencing in a volunteer capacity, then they could eventually pay for the influencers to do things. So it leads to this idea of the interplay. Professional philanthropists could buy out the teaching responsibilities of a leading scientist, so they could spend their time on research, and they could do that with just part of their income. An influencer could get many other people to become professional philanthropists by influencing them to do so. An improver could free up the time of a very effective influencer. A researcher could investigate how to work out which of these is the best strategy, and so on and so forth. There is a lot of interplay between these ideas. These are just four kind of really effective ways that have been identified for thinking about this. So, in conclusions, choosing a career is very important with something like 80,000 hours of your time that you're trying to work out what to do with. And this time can be immensely valuable for others, as the examples I've given hopefully show. Furthermore, there's a great variability in people's impact. It goes up from, say, if we're using the saving lives metric, from 0 to hundreds of millions. There is it's a case where focusing on what you make happen rather than what you do can vastly improve your impact. And finally, that people are only just beginning to explore this in a systematic way, as some of these rather basic ideas I'm presenting suggest, that people really haven't thought about. And there's lots of potential for good ideas in this area. It's a very exciting area, both for academic research and also for non-academic research, just trying to work out for yourselves what makes things work. And it's worth many more hours of thought, I think. So if you still haven't used up your 800 hours of thought yet, I would suggest that you save a couple more after thinking about this topic.
Hi everyone. Before we open up for 10 minutes of questions, I'm just going to introduce 80,000 Hours. So we're a community of people who want to use their careers to help others. We think it's important to help others, and we think it's better to help more people rather than less people. So we try to weigh up careers in terms of how much good those careers can do. And then we try to help each other in doing good with our careers. We find if you've been interested in these ideas and you agree with these things, then you should become a member. All our members say that they want to make helping others a significant part of their career, and they aim to be as effective as possible in what they give. And they choose their careers in order to help other people. We've already got lots of members working as entrepreneurs, in politics, technology, campaigning, medicine, finance, research, cost effectiveness, existential risk, economics, and lots more. If you've been at all interested in anything in this talk, send us an email or check out our website. There's more information on the website. And you can also join up to our mailing list on the website. And please come and talk to us after. So almost all the people at the back are involved in 80,000 Hours, so come and talk to them. Don't forget your feedback forms. We've got some spare pencils at the back. And we're just going to have 10 minutes of questions, and then we've got loads of drinks, so join us for that.
Okay. Also, if you have any questions for Ben, ask them too. Any questions?
Yeah.
So I think it sounds great, but I often find myself a little bit paralysed by not knowing what I could do. So you give an example where, pick a good researcher in your department and maybe take his teaching load. But it's clearly not as simple as that, because maybe if the professor gave the lecture, he would inspire people greater than if the teaching assistant gave the lecture. And so how do you come to some conclusions what to actually do?
So one thing is definitely among the least effective things that you could do is to be paralysed by doubts about these things. At some point, I think the idea is to think about the expected benefit you could have. So multiply out, in some intuitive sense, the probabilities by the stakes in these different cases, and try to come up with some ideas. So in this case, it seems to me that the idea is that you want to find someone who's better at research than they are at teaching, in this particular case. If you manage to find, if the best person in your department was at research, also happened to be the best person at teaching, and was inspiring loads of people through his teaching, or her teaching as well as the research, then that would be quite a challenging situation. But I imagine if you had Alan Turing in your department or something, you would say, okay, this is going to be a lot better at research than teaching, so it's not that much of an issue. But you're right, there can be trade-offs in these things, and we want to think about them quite carefully. I mean, the examples of careers and ideas that I put forward weren't really, in some ways, all that similar to the types of careers you see if you go to a careers fair. But I was trying to get people to think about what is the kind of envelope of really spectacular careers that you could have. I mean, I think it's kind of crazy that you could have some of these careers where your friends are probably parents and think, oh my god, this person's totally dropped out. They had this degree, now they're mowing lawns. These people, it's like a charity project of mowing lawns. And then, you end up just having, hundreds of thousands of times as much impact as your parents who are kind of scoffing at your career. I mean, it's a pretty odd fact about some of these things. So I was trying to get people to think about that. But what I recommend, if you're thinking about more practically your careers, is probably to talk to these 80,000 hours people and find out ideas. And they're playing around with these ideas just recently. I've been thinking about it for a couple of years now, I think, and trying to actually get a group of people to start their careers, keep in touch with each other, and try to help each other to have really effective careers and to think about these issues quite practically. And as a network of people, if one of them turns out to have some possibility to achieve a great deal by some clever technique, then I think sharing it with the other people, they'd love to give advice and think about it. Definitely it's very useful to have someone to talk through some of these things with them, as just trying to work it out by yourself. Particularly if you see the kind of dizzying tower of the stakes, can just get quite paralysing. So I know the feeling, but I think that there are some ways through it, particularly having a community of people thinking about these things. Yep.
Do you think it's plausible that Bill Gates would have gotten to where he is by applying this sort of logic in the early stages of history?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know how much of the particular careers I mentioned is chance and how much is kind of just being in the right place at the right time type situation. So I don't know how much of that's predictable. If you teleported the young Bill Gates through in time so he could start it now, would you be able to find a great opportunity to really take advantage of? Probably find something pretty impressive, but probably less impressive than he actually found. He probably got pretty lucky on that. And so it's, I can't make you all as rich as Bill Gates, but you can definitely predictably make several million pounds, and you'll probably make a couple of million pounds in your careers anyway, if you just look at the average career earnings of graduates. But you can probably increase that by quite a bit if you do go to finance or some area like that. And I think relatively easily earn something like £6 to £10 million of your careers if you want to earn money. But I don't know how to make you earn £1 billion. And I think Bill Gates was lucky enough that if he did anything to change his mind on something, he probably make things worse. So we'll be less with that. Other thoughts?
It seems that for your presentation, it seems to me that the one measure that's used to measure the good you do to people is the number of lives saved. Now, that's a good thing. I mean, well, it's an advantage in the sense that we all agree that saving lives is good, and a person alive is better than a person dead. It's easily measurable, etc. But on the other hand, it's also clear that there's more than that can be done in the world. So my question is rather, to the people in this room, would you advise sticking to that objective? Or would you
no, I wouldn't advise it at all. In fact, in my other talks on charity effectiveness, I tell people not to use saving lives as a measure. I was just putting it in here as a shorthand for not having to explain what better measures look like and spending 10 minutes on that or something. But I think it was just there as an intuitive measure, and it was convenient that a lot of the people, high impact careers that I mentioned, actually did save lives, so I could compare them on this yardstick. But there are lots of ways in which you can help people, and saving lives is one. Health in general is a much broader one than just saving lives, but even that's only a small component of all the different things that you can do. So I recommend thinking about quite a lot more than that. Some of the things you can try to turn into dollars as a way of understanding, or pounds, but that has its own problems, because dollars gained for rich people are worth less than dollars gained for poor people. So unless you're kind of majorly adjusting for that, then you're likely to get a bit of a skewed view. You might think that somehow making luxury cars for rich people turns out to be creating a lot of value in the world because they're prepared to spend the dollars poverty. So I would encourage people to actually think about wide metrics for working up these ideas.
It kind of follows on really. I mean, how do you really go about measuring positive impacts in people's lives? Because it seems to me that positive impact is about improving quality of life, but that is inherently subjective.
Well, yeah, so I think that a lot of it's about improving quality of life. Some of it might be about indirectly improving quality of life or something. For example, if you want to help the environment, you think that that's important. You might think that's important for improving the quality of future human lives, or it's important for improving animal lives as well, or it might just be important over and above those things. So with this particular talk, it doesn't really matter. The idea is that you can just think of whatever you think is of value and think of your own intuitive judgments about what's of value. And then you can see that some people are achieving a lot of what you think is of value, and some people are achieving a lot less. And you could go and try to help one of the people who's achieving a lot more be more effective, and you could go and try to influence more people to do more of what you think is really valuable.
With all due respect, what if you're a despot? When you're completely deluded, and what you think is totally valuable actually turns out to be the opposite for most people.
That could happen to you, but I'm not sure that you'd be really helped by me saying that you should try to save lives, because you'd say, I'm not that interested in that. So if you have just kind of wacky values, then I'm not sure you're going to get much out of the talk, perhaps. But I think that for a lot of you, you have some idea that it's really important that certain policies get implemented, and there's a lot of things that really move you about the society and problems with it and ways it can be better. And you can see something about this, and you've got some idea that if you can change the working conditions of people, that changing the working conditions of a few people in your company might be good, but changing it through large-scale government policy, thousands of people or millions of people across the EU or something like that, would be much better. So you can think about things that you find important, and then think about them on the larger scales and see what you can do about it.
Well, on that note, do you think that in doing what you just said, should we choose something where we can measure the difference? We can accurately measure the difference?
If you can. So I'm a big believer in metrics, even if they're only roughly quantitative. So we can't be precise enough. Maybe we can get them right within a factor of 2. But you can find that some careers could do 1,000 times as much of that stuff, or maybe 500 times as much, or maybe 2,000 times. We're not exactly sure, but it's way bigger than the original. So often, even if something is roughly quantitative, that's enough. I wouldn't obsess too much about the quantitative things. There certainly is a danger of just trying to improve what's measurable rather than what's actually important. So you certainly want to bear that in mind when you're trying to think about quantities. But even with just armed with a kind of rough idea as to how important things are, with some rough ability to see that if something affects 1,000 people in the same ways as if the other thing affected one person that is about 1,000 times better, if you've got some rough ideas like that, then you can probably make it through with these ideas. Anything more time for us? Okay.
Yeah, just a question on sort of opportunity cost really, because if a chap is not mowing his lawn, it may not be the case that he is researching what he's good at.
Yeah.
He is in fact watching TV,
Yeah.
firstly. And secondly, even if you were to be researching, maybe there's the case that his marginal impact decreases because he's been working so hard.
Yep.
So therefore wouldn't
this is a reason why I said you wouldn't want to replace their leisure time because it's not clear that that will help. If you find that they're spending an hour watching TV, you say, no, don't worry, I can deal with that. Or if they spend an hour and they spend an hour like pottering around in the garden, it might be the case that actually enjoying that is really leisure time for them. I think mowing the lawn is a little bit less plausible to be leisure time. There is a question though about the elasticity of the work. So if you take an hour of their mowing time, where will they distribute that hour? They'll probably distribute some of it into work and some into leisure. And so you'll get less than 100% of the benefit that you're thinking of. But maybe you'd get as high as 10% of the benefit or 50% of the benefit, which for these types of cases is so big that it's really astronomical benefit anyway. It's also true though that not just that if they're working extra hours per week, that they might get less productive, but it can also be true that just working extra hours on these tasks might be less important than the first hours on these tasks. Maybe they've made big impacts in their field and the rest of the impacts are a lot smaller at that point. So you're probably going to get some kind of diminishing returns on these things. That would be my guess. But it still should be very big amounts, I would think. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I was just following up on the question, two questions about whether you should choose a career that's measurable. I was wondering how you would deal with uncertainty. So if I choose to go into a career where maybe there's a 5 or 10% chance I develop the vaccine, or if I'm at the lawn for someone who may develop the vaccine, if the outcome is that the vaccine is not developed, the outcome is negligible, but is it a good career choice in general?
So my approach to this would be to multiply out the stakes by the probabilities. So to take what's called the expectation.
Yeah.
And there are some pretty good reasons to do that. One good reason to do it is that if a whole group of people, say over in this room, decides they're all going to maximise the expectations of their careers, then we predictably lead to a much larger, better outcome than if we decide to all be risk averse about it. If there's only one person, then it's very stochastic. It either happens or it doesn't. But if you get enough people like this to make this decision, then this is the best way for them to make that decision. That's an example of a reason for it. But there are other reasons. It's difficult to get a consistent system happening if you're risk averse about these things. There are serious troubles for it. There's quite a bit written in philosophy and in economics about that. But it's not totally outlandish to be risk averse. In particular, it makes a lot of sense to be risk averse about money in your own life, for your own benefit. But that's because you get diminishing marginal returns on money. And so you're not really being risk averse in terms of happiness. It's just that money is non-linear for producing happiness. Yeah.
I think I probably speak for a lot of people in this room in saying that I found the talk really inspirational. I'd love to go away and think about it and do something about it and inspire other people to think about it. But I'm kind of feel that I'm in danger of getting on, bogged down in my everyday life, getting involved in myself and just towing the path again. And I was wondering if you have any very practical suggestions of ways to keep this in our minds, to make sure that we do spend more hours thinking about it.
I think it's probably the easiest way is to send an email to that address, and they'll probably nag you about it or something like that to make sure I don't completely forget about it. But it's a good point. I mean, I often found myself in that situation. I'm very motivated by something, and sometimes even it feels like there's a moment of clarity where you think, yeah, that is right, and I should spend quite a bit of time on that. And then a year later you think, oh my god, hang on, I totally forgot about that thing that I was meant to be doing. I've just totally failed to achieve what I wanted to do for the last year. So I've definitely been in that situation. Not sure exactly what the general solution is, but various forms of reminders to yourself, or asking your friends to remind you and so on, or asking how you're getting on with thinking about that thing. But thinking about these things by yourself is definitely useful. It's also useful to think and just chat about it with other people. I find that I make much more progress when I'm chatting with other people. I like to spend, more than half of my thinking time thinking out loud with others. That does differ by different people. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Toby, again.
have drinks on.